Perfect. All right. Hi, everyone. Happy holidays. Thank you for coming to the second Comp Career Catalyst, or C3 session of the year. My name is Elena, and I'm here to moderate with my colleague, Odette. So today's session is all about proton and heavy ion therapy. We thought this would be an insightful session because particle therapy does not yet exist in Canada, but there are ongoing plans to implement it, and we thought it would be a good idea to have this option or be aware of this option when we enter the clinic. So we're very grateful to have an amazing and experienced lineup of speakers. Dr. Susu Yan from Massachusetts General Hospital, Dr. Derek Tsang from the University Health Network in Ontario, and Dr. Andrea Mairani from Heidelberg Ion Beam Therapy Center. So before we begin, I'll pass the introduction of the CompStudent Council to Odette.
Hey, so good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So first, we would like to do a land on acknowledgements. So McGill University is on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose presence marks this territory on which people of the world now gather. So you're encouraged to visit whos.land to learn more about it. Okay, so first I would like to state our mission as a CompStudent Council. So it's an education subcommittee involved with the student and trainees' interest in medical physics across Canada. So our mission is to advise the COM board through the education committee on matters of importance to CompStudent members, assist COM in attracting and retaining student members, organize social, academic, and professional developments events for students in the academic year, and even at the COM annual scientific meeting, and help to create a student community. So our initiatives, we have several initiatives. So here are some of them. So for example, we have student events at the annual scientific meeting. We have the Young Professional Workshop, the Canadian Residency Fair, the Science Spoke Society S3, or also known as the 3 Thesis Competition, the Student Night Out, and also as we are compromised with, we encourage inclusion, we also sponsor the IDEA Travel Award. We host also the research discovery seminars, the ambassador program, among other initiatives. So if you are interested for research discovery seminars, where are seminars where students across Canada and internationally in medical physics share their work. So here is the interest form. You can submit your abstract. And also we have the Com Career Catalyst C3 seminar series that is such as like this one. So the C3 is a professional development series designed for students and trainees who are interested in enhancing their knowledge and developing skills for success in graduate school and accelerate a future in medical physics. So all these sessions are recorded and are available in our YouTube channel and the student network registration, so you can see receive all the emails about our several events is here, so you can scan the QR code. So our agenda and housekeeping. So first we have the opening remarks that we are already finishing, and then we have the presentation by Dr. Susu Yan. I think she's joining. If not, we will start with Dr. Derek Tsang, and then the presentation by Dr. Andrea Mairani, and then we will follow by the question and answer with the speakers, and then we'll have the closing remarks. So please, during the talks, please mute your mic so we don't have any interruptions during the presentations. And also, you are welcome to write all your questions in the chat, and or wait until the Q and answer session. Please be aware again that this recording will be shared on YouTube.
Awesome. Thanks, Odette. And with that, I'm honored to introduce our first speaker. Dr. Susu Yan is a medical physicist in the Department of Radiation Oncology at Massachusetts General Hospital. She earned her PhD in medical physics from Duke University and her residency at Harvard. Dr. Yan's current research focuses on the global democratization of proton therapy with the goal of increasing its accessibility to patients worldwide. Her innovative work aims to lower the capital costs associated with proton therapy by developing gantry-less compact proton therapy systems. Through her research, she has demonstrated that gantry-less proton therapy, when combined with modern beam delivery techniques, could be as effective as traditional gantry-based treatments for most disease sites. In addition, her work incorporates soft robotic immobilization and patient positioning devices in a sitting orientation, enhancing the feasibility and precision of proton therapy. Dr. Yan, the floor is yours. Please feel free to share your screen.
Thank you very much for your invitation, and I'm grateful to be here to share my background, experience, and some of the research with you all. I'm gonna share my screen. Can you all see it?
Yes.
Great. I will just start to the first slides. I am currently involved in a Mavion-sponsored research on treatment planning. So this is my disclosure. And I think I would like to start a little bit of the background of my journey, since I think most of the students are looking into medical physics career. So I did a physics major in undergrad. And in 2008, I was visiting the MIT campus in Boston, and I saw this amazing robotic lab. I took a photo, but I think, yeah, I'm interested in engineer. I'm interested in making innovations, helping patients, so that I chose the medical physics as my graduate study. I went to Duke from 2010 to 2014. I had the great pleasure to work with my mentors, Dr. Fang Yin and Dr. James Bauscher there, actually on a robotic project, which, I had probably the very early interest when I was visiting MIT. So we worked on this robotic onboard SPECT imaging system. We started from scratch, bought the robotic arm and putting the detector and phantom together, was trying to do an onboard functional imaging. And after graduation, I came to Boston. I started my residency in medical physics at the Harvard Medical Physics program. And the first year of our program is a research year. So I chose a project, and that's when my journey in proton physics started. I chose a project with Dr. Bortfeld, Jay Flans, and Dr. Xiaoming Lu on analyzing our proton patient data. And little did I know, when I started, I actually had the opportunity to collaborate with Dr. Daniela Ruse at the MIT C-Cell lab, which is the robotic lab that I saw in 2008. So this is the picture taken when I was visiting the campus, and this is the picture taken outside the same lab when I moved to Boston and had this collaboration. So that's kind of a dream come true, which I think I'm very grateful for. So through my residency, and then after my residency, I stayed at MGH to start my clinical work, also continue the research project on democratizing proton therapy. And some of the story was actually written with Dr. Bortfeld in a sort of an article published in Medical Physics, and I won't go in more details, but if you would like to read that, it's interesting also to see how Dr. Bortfeld's journey through proton therapy as a senior leader. So I just gave a little bit background of proton therapy. So Bragg-Pig is the physics phenomenon that was actually applied to treating cancer patients by physicists in the early 1950s. So what does this work in cancer treatment is that proton, as you see here in this red line, that could deposit most of its energy in the tumor compared to photon therapy, as you see this blue line, that may deposit those into healthy tissues around the tumor. So in a better illustration here, we can see that for a brain tumor patient, proton therapy can concentrate most of its dose to the tumor and spare the healthy tissues around it. And that could reduce the side effects and have a better long-term outcome. So also shown here is more clear, as you can see, the dose for photon are a little bit more spread out than the proton, where the healthy brain is not exposed to the radiation. So as I said, I started my journey in proton therapy when I started my residency, and my first project was to analyze 10 years of proton patients' data at MGH, where our goal was analyzing whether the gantry, which is the structure that rotates the proton beam 360 degrees around the patient, were actually fully used. And this work helped lay the foundation for our gantry-less proton therapy system later on. And I really appreciate the opportunity with the mentors. And our current work focuses on democratization of proton therapy, which is to develop a compact system that can retrofit into a traditional Linux-sized room. And by this way, we hope to make proton therapy more affordable and accessible. And as we know that proton therapy is a very limited resource worldwide. There are only 116 proton centers currently in operation. And as you can see, most of the proton centers are concentrated in the high and middle income countries, well, mostly high income countries. So despite these centers, there are only less than 2% of patients who could have benefit from proton therapy are actually receiving proton therapy. And so this figure here shows sort of the increasing of the number of proton centers by years. As we see, proton therapy started in the 1950s and 60s at Uppsala and Harvard. And as year goes by, when in 1990, it was the first hospital-based proton therapy facility developed. And the increasing is more like exponential afterwards with technologies, groundbreaking through technologies that help the development of proton therapy. For example, in 1996, pencil beam scanning was developed. So before that, we used double scattering. And then in 2013, single room facility was developed. And then in 2020, which I'll show you later, we actually have a retrofit of the proton system into conventional LINAC treatment rooms. And we see this red curve here is the number of patients treated per year on a log scale. It's also increasing exponentially as the number of proton centers increasing, but still, as we mentioned, there are only less than 2% of patients who can who have access to proton therapy. So this is a treatment room layout at MGH Proton Center. And we have a cyclotron here, and these red lines here is called the beam line, which transport the proton to the treatment room. And we have 3 treatment rooms here at our Burr Proton facility. We have 2 gantries here and a 2 or 3 fixed beam line, 2 for treatment of radiosurgery and ocular eye treatment, and 1 for experiment. So this whole floor plan is say about maybe football stadium size, and you can imagine having that in the downtown Boston underground. That's pretty amazing. We have actually done a second proton center built several years ago, and as the field moved towards a smaller system, so single room system kind of emerged several years ago. And this picture shows here is an IBA single room system compared to this red double bus from UK. As just the illustrations, you see even a single room system, how big that is. So when we implemented the second proton system at MGH, we had 2 empty LINAC vaults. So we were thinking if we could put in a proton system there, and our engineers, physicists work with Proton International to get the system disassembled, to get the equipment disassembled to small pieces so that they can fit into the elevators. This is you see inside the room with a robotic couch, onboard imaging system, and this is a half gantry system with the nozzle here. But behind the room, it's actually we need to dig a 10-meter or even slightly more whole big pit to hold this not so compact gantry to rotate the beam. So gantry is the most cost it takes the largest space in the whole system, and it's cost the most. So you can see in this picture, the gantry compares to a human standing on the ground. It is typically 12-meter high and more than 100-ton weight. So our goal is to remove the gantry and see if we could treat the patient with a horizontal fixed beam line by moving the patient in front of the beam rather than moving the beam. And by this, we hope, we could both reduce the capital cost, the installation cost, and also reduce the space needed to install the system. And we think that the gantry can be removed if we could develop technologies in the 3 major parts. The first one is patient positioning and immobilization. Second one is utilize the high-resolution pencil beam scanning. And the third is advanced in-room imaging and adaptation. And here I will show some very brief introduction to what we have been doing in our group. We have this prototype robotic patient positioner and soft robotic immobilization in collaboration with MIT. And we have already had some healthy volunteer study on the immobilization part, and we have ongoing study to hope to do patient study soon. And we also have students worked on using AI to have a automated segmentation and a synthetic CT generation from cone beam CT for proton planning. And we have also worked on see if we could use low field MRI scanner in the proton treatment room to facilitate onboard imaging or for adaptation. We had a collaboration with Hyperfine scanner system and to put their system in our Burr proton treatment room and study if there's any effect or interference between MRI imaging and proton delivery. There was also a study that evaluate MRI treatment, MRI image quality versus scan time, and to see how we could utilize that to facilitate proton democratization. We also have a ongoing treatment planning study sponsored by Mavion to evaluate without the gantry, if we have a fixed beam, how could we achieve the same plan quality as if we have a gantry? And also when we're treating the patient in the upright position, there might be organ deformation and new anatomy that we observe. So we are doing treatment planning study or deformable registration study to understand the dosimetric effect when we're treating patient upright. So that is a very brief talk about what we are doing in the research. And I would like to conclude the talk by looking into the future. We have seen the past and the present of proton therapy, and there are great opportunities for the future as our goal to reduce the size and the cost of the system. And ultimately, we hope that we could increase patient access and improve patient care with a more affordable and accessible proton therapy system. And we have a working group in the AAPM on global democratization. And if you would like to contribute, we would be happy to have you join our annual meeting. And just giving this talk session, I think some of my thoughts is for students who are interested in medical physics or proton therapy field, background in physics, engineering, or biomedical engineering is definitely valuable. But I think equally important are the collaboration skills and your passion for innovation. And there are many career opportunities, I think, in the field of proton therapy, which is very exciting. A lot more work needs to be done. So I think be curious, be passionate, and stay engaged and open to the interdisciplinary work would help everybody in the proton therapy career. And with that, I would like to thank all my mentors, collaborators, having me to have this great opportunity to work in this exciting field. Thank you, and I'm very happy to be here sharing my thoughts with you.
Amazing. Thank you for the incredible talk, Dr. Yan. It's really cool to see your journey in medical physics and your research. It's really, really interesting stuff. We'll hold off on questions for the Q&A session, and we'll move on now to and I'll move on to introduce our second speaker. Dr. Derek Tsang is an associate professor at the University of Toronto's Radiation Oncology Department, or UTDRO. He's a radiation oncologist at the Princess Margaret Cancer Center and Hospital for Sick Children. Dr. Tsang completed his medical training at Queen's University, followed by a residency in radiation oncology at the University of Toronto. He obtained fellowship training in pediatric RO at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, and holds a master's degree in clinical epidemiology from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. His research focuses on re-irradiation for recurrent tumors, reducing late effects of radiotherapy, SRS for intracranial neoplasms, and using proton therapy for pediatric cancers. He participates in international cooperative group studies with the Children's Oncology Group and the NRG Oncology, serves as an associate editor for the Red Journal, and sits on the editorial board for Neuro-Oncology. Since joining Princess Margaret Cancer Center in 2017, he has led the pediatric radiation therapy program and is a member of the adult CNS and eye tumor site groups. So Dr. Derek Tsang, please feel free to share your screen. The floor is yours.
Thanks for having me. Let me get my slides up. Great. So I come from this from the perspective of having tried to bring a proton particle program to Canada for the last few years. So I'll go over how we built a case for protons in Canada and specifically in our province of Ontario, which is the most, as you know, the most populous province in the country. And hopefully that's helpful just so you can learn some of the efforts that we've done, and hopefully they will give us some success in the future. So we'll describe our journey towards proton therapy in Toronto and Canada. This is a paper that I published with Beate Timmerman last year, and it does speak to the global inequity about access to protons, both stateside and around the world. The states and regions in green are the ones that have protons, and those in orange are those that have active units under construction. And in the central United States, even many states in the Northeast and in the South, there's areas and pockets that don't have protons. And then globally, certainly all of South America doesn't have any, though Argentina is building one. And Africa really is an area of lack of access to this important modality. I will comment that Canada is in gray so far, but there's really countries around the world, so-called low or middle income nations that have access to protons. So really Canada is falling behind. There is not a lack of advocacy. So this is the Toronto Star. And again, Canada is the only G7 country without a clinical proton facility. There is awareness about this issue. It's just getting governments to action it that has been quite a journey. So I like to look at the PTCOG website and scroll down, and there's countries like China, India, Russia, Saudi Arabia. They all have proton units under construction or in operation, and many in the United States, and we don't have any here yet in Canada. So we thought of it in two steps. One is to convince the government that proton beam is a suitable treatment for some patients with cancer. That was the first step. And then step two, which I'll go into afterward, is then to advocate to build a facility within the province. So we tried to have a lot of advocacy. I was a resident back in 2014, and there was a symposium on photons, protons, and particles. So that is 11 years ago. That same year, Cancer Care Ontario put out a report on access to proton for patients in Ontario, and they questioned should there be access to protons, and they said yes. Current evidence strongly suggests making protons a priority for patients in Ontario. Alberta, which is a province in the west, put out this report from Samir Patel and others. They looked at who should go for protons out of country. And it was a systematic review, again, from 11 years ago. And they looked at the number of patients who had funding applications to the province. It was still in the low numbers, up to 11 applications in 2023. And they were funded. I will comment, interestingly, they had more denials early on. And then as time went on, they had more cases funded for out-of-province travel and fewer denials. This was a CARO a few years ago, where Thomas Bortfeldt gave a talk on protons, which was well received. This was a few years ago. 2018, we put on yet another symposium to, continue to raise awareness in Toronto. Samir and I put out an article in Canadian Medical Association Journal in 2019. That's 6 years ago. The Canadian Association of Provincial Cancer Agencies, CAPCA, put out a consensus recommendations about protons. I won't read these out loud, but basically it says that there are certain patients that we acknowledge should be suitable for protons. And this was really some formalized guidelines that provinces could draw on to say, like, this patient really should go for protons, right? And so in Toronto, we launched a proton consultation service, a comparative planning service, basically, so that a doctor from Halifax or Sudbury or Winnipeg could send us a RT DICOM set with contours on it. And we had a license from Ray station to create a example proton plan, and then we would send it back to the referring oncologist, and they would compare and decide whether protons was suitable for their patient. Alana knows this well because she's done some of her research on this, and we would provide a report back to the team, and with the caveat that we're not a real proton center, right? We're doing these as examples, but it was nonetheless helpful for many of the outside oncologists across Canada to see what protons could or couldn't do for their patients. So we would give written report and then send back some screenshots. So this was a tumor in the retroperitoneal region, and you can see obviously that the low dose splash is much reduced on the proton plan on the left as compared to the VMAT plan on the right. And we would send back some screenshots of DVHs. In this specific case, the kidney dose was a lot less with protons. So we started this 5 years ago, and as of last year we had done a few dozen referrals, 52. A majority were outside for a hospital, and then about a third actually went for protons. Many of them were patients with metastatic disease, or they had very aggressive tumors and they needed to get started on treatment. So not everyone went on to actually get proton. So we did, in collaboration with some BC investigators, Dr. Sylvia Tsang reviewed all the number of patients going for protons across Canada. To be able to advocate for something, you have to know how many patients are actually needing it. So in Ontario, is the orange line, the number of patients being sent out of province was going up over time. Same across the other provinces, and then COVID hit and there was a bit of a dip. So within Ontario, these are the up-to-date numbers for fiscal year. You can see at the top the numbers were 3, 9, and then they went up to the dozens, and then in the latest fiscal year, it ended up around 40 patients from Ontario who are going out of province. These numbers, it looks good, right? That the volume of proton patients going out of country is higher, but keep in mind that Ontario Health itself has estimated about 6% of all radical cases should potentially derive some benefit from proton therapy. So that would be up to 1,600 cases per year. There are a lot of barriers to getting patients down south for proton. We're limited in Ontario. We're limited to these institutions listed here. They have preferred provider agreements with the province, and so we're limited, and we have to send to these places. So if someone has a friend who lives in New York, they can't go to New York Proton Center. They have to go to one of these if they want the province to pay for it. In addition, patients have to pay for travel, accommodations, and meals. And certainly with the ongoing border tensions and such, it's been yet additional barrier in getting our patients to American proton facilities. We've had some inquiries about whether some patients have EU connections. Could they get treatment in Europe? Probably for less money and easier immigration, but that has to be an ongoing discussion with the province because they're very they currently only have the preferred provider agreements with the American institution. So the numbers are low, even though we think up to 1,600 patients would benefit from protons. The numbers are still below 100 a year because of many of these barriers. So the workflow is as such. If a patient agrees to a proton therapy referral, we, the radiation oncologist, I would reach out and email my counterpart in the proton center. I would send an application to the Ministry of Health. We also concurrently send an application to the Cancer Care Ontario, who renders a decision to the Ministry of Health after seeking the advice of 2 fellow radiation oncologists. This process takes about 1 to 3 weeks, and then the Ministry of Health then issues a prior approval letter so that they have insurance and the American Center can be assured that the treatment is covered. And the patient travels to the U.S. for consultation, simulation, and treatment. And again, patients are on the hook for meals, travel, and accommodations, which can be quite a barrier for many individuals. So, over the last 10 years, we've advocated with the province and demonstrated that there is a need to have proton beam therapy available for patients. And availability means that we're sending the patients out of country for treatment. So now on the Ontario.ca government website, there's an official page about out-of-country covered services for patients, and proton beam therapy is one of them. So this has been a success, and most patients that are reasonable are covered. So children are usually covered, they're not denied. Some young adults with pediatric type tumors are covered, and some adults with adult type tumors are covered if it can be justified. So now the second step, now that we know that this is a need for patients, is to advocate the government to build a facility within the province. That's an ongoing effort. CADTH, which is now called CDA, they do health technology assessments. This report was issued 8 years ago, and they wrote that installing a proton beam facility in Canada may demonstrate cost savings compared with sending patients out of country for treatment. So that's a great first step. You know, if you want the government to pay for something, we should say it saves money. And then concurrently, UHN, which is the hospital where I primarily work at, and Sick Kids, where I also work, we submitted a joint business case to the Ministry of Health in 2017. This is an editorial we put out in 2019 in National Post about, you know, bringing awareness to the fact that some patients need to leave the country. Amir Safavi, who works at radiation oncologist at Sunnybrook in Toronto, we co-authored this paper on equity in Canada. Again, bringing awareness to the fact that patients have to travel out of country, and it's really inequitable. And you know, congratulations to Amir that this was one of the most downloaded papers in 2023 in the Red Journal. So this was a summary of Amir's work, and really we concluded, based on, you know, to maximize equity, maximize access to care for patients who, you know, might not be able to travel, we really should have multiple proton facilities across Canada to minimize patient time, travel, and expenses. And then additionally, a travel grant should be created to support the cost of traveling for this treatment. Within our province, we have something called the Northern Travel Grant for patients who cannot access care close to home in the northern part of the province. They get some funding to come to Toronto or Ottawa or Kingston or London for their treatments, and something similar should be done for proton beam therapy. So this culminated in a report that was issued now 4 years ago. Ontario Health recommends publicly funding proton beam therapy for kids and some adult cancers. And this was really the impetus for driving forward the planning processes for a facility within Toronto. Okay, so this was exciting for us. We had yet another symposium in 2022. And then that year, the Ontario government announced some funding to include $5 million to help plan, not build, plan first hospital-based proton facility at UHN. So this was also very exciting. And the health minister came. This is our CEO, hospital CEO, and our head of radiation. There was a bit of an announcement, so that was quite nice. So we took that money and did the planning. So this is a proposed layout of a facility. It currently sits in a park. The area we're eyeing has a parking lot in it. So we're thinking that we would remove that and then build the facility in the basement, of course, and then have parking above it, and then have expansion space for 2 towers of that. The proposed project site is in the star here. So just to orient you, the green space in the top left is Queen's Park, or provincial legislature. The crab is the existing cancer center, and then the red cross marks are existing hospitals. And then there's a parking lot where the red star is, and then that's the site that we're eyeing for this facility. Importantly, we have to be close to our pediatric colleagues, and so the Hospital for Sick Children is the child holding the balloon here. That's just kitty corner away and would be connected by tunnels, so that we have support for anesthesia services and code plink. And then additionally, there's the green house on the left of the map. That's the Ronald McDonald House for the kids who need to stay for their treatment from out of town. So we're really aiming to have all the services centralized and closely accessible for patient services and healthcare providers. Now, this is intended to be a provincial resource. and arguably our national resource too. But we'll focus, because healthcare, as we all know, is a provincial responsibility. We'll focus on the provincial for now. The classic traditional referral pathway is, one referred to the Proton Center, they take care of everything, and then they send the patient back to have their ongoing follow-up in London or Winnipeg or Ottawa or what have you. We wanted to build upon this because as a provincial resource, we know physicians also want to be actively involved in the care of their patients. So we built a collaborative care pathway where, radiation oncologist in Ottawa sees the patient, bring it to our tumor board, they order the simulation, they can plan the patient themselves remotely. It's one of the, I guess, side benefits of COVID is that virtual care infrastructure is very robust now so that they can, via Citrix contour the case in a treatment planning software. Going to get peer treatment planning. They'll work with our physicists and our planners to review the plan remotely. There'll be QA at the Proton Particle Center, and then weekly review can be done remotely, all with support from the Proton or Particle Center if needed. Okay, so this collaborative care pathway is really intended to support and improve access for physicians across the province. Regardless of where they live, they would have easy access to proton therapy. The province has laid out a very detailed planning schematic. We've done sort of stage 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 is actually complete. And our understanding is that the stage 1.3 is in the process of being approved, and then hopefully we can move onward to more ongoing planning for the facility. These various stages of program approval were submitted over the course of several years. It does feel like it's like a manuscript. That's revision 1, revision 2, revision 3, revision 4. In the meantime, we put out another editorial last year, and we're still sort of waiting for approval to move on to the next stage. So it is a long process. At meetings, I sometimes see pictures of investigators when they show pictures of their children from when they started a clinical trial to when they published and presented it. This isn't published or presented or done yet by any means, but I have pictures of my 2 children in the top left when I first started getting involved, and the pictures of my kids in the bottom right as they're now. I got an extra kid in the meantime, and they're older now. So this is still an ongoing process, and maybe, hopefully, by the time I come speak with you again, we have shovels in ground or we're able to treat the first patient. They're not teenagers with their own children. But it is a long process, but we're plugging away hard. Very briefly, I'll talk about Quebec. Quebec in 2018 announced a private facility in collaboration with a company called CDL Laboratories to build a proton facility. So this was a big flashy thing, and we were all kind of excited about it. It was going to be privately owned. And so then there were a bunch of editorials in the paper. So La Presse said, oh no, a private clinic is offering proton therapy. And then proton therapy, Quebec has chosen private, deplore the doctors. And so there were limitations to this private center. It was going to be standalone, not attached to a hospital, far away from the pediatric support services. Arguably, if it's not tied to a university health center, it might not be as academic. So the government changed, and then the public funding agreement with this private company was discontinued. And as I understand it, the Quebec government again is seeking proposals for a publicly funded facility. So that's an ongoing effort. Alberta put out some guidelines about protons a couple of years ago, and then this was in our national news. The Ben Stelter Foundation is going to bring advanced treatment with an Edmonton proton facility, and they announced that they were starting to plan this. What I'm unclear about, and the information is lacking on this point, is how is it going to be, there's going to be some private donations, it sounds like, to build the facility, but how will it be operated? Who will pay for the ongoing operations? Is it going to be affiliated with an academic hospital? And I'd look forward to further details on this point. What is somewhat exciting is that PT-COG put the Ben Stelter Edmonton facility on their planning stage list. So that's hopefully that means they're making progress. So to conclude, I think we've demonstrated that Canada needs a proton beam facility. We have successfully convinced the government that protons is a useful treatment for cancer because they pay for the patients to go out of country in the United States for that. And ongoing, we need to convince the government to actually put shovels in ground and start building a domestic facility. And then the next step would be to actually build it, which of course will be a fun, challenging and interesting process, but also very, very exciting if we get to that stage. Should I say when we get to that stage? So thank you very much for having me. And of course, I think questions are at the end on the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Derek. That was very insightful for Canada and to build the proton therapy machine. Thank you so much. Okay, so we'll hold the questions for the panel. And now I'm happy to introduce Dr. Andrea Mariani. So Dr. Andrea Mariani is scientific director of the Heidelberg Ion Beam Therapy Center. He earned his PhD in nuclear physics and hadron therapy at Università di Pavia, completed his postdoctoral training at Heidelberg Ion Beam Therapy Center, and worked as an academic researcher at Centro Nazionale di Radioterapia Oncologica in Pavia, Italy. Dr. Mariani leads the Biophysics in Particle Therapy group, which is at the forefront of innovation in particle therapy for cancer treatment. His team advances computational and experimental methods for light and heavy ion therapy, such as helium, carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, improving clinical treatment planning systems and validating their accuracy through large-scale clinical investigations. Recent achievements under his leadership include the clinical implementation of multi-ion therapy, pioneering research in ultra-high dose rate or flash therapy, and the development of mini beam in particle arc techniques that enhance the precision, robustness, efficacy, and normal tissue sparing in radiotherapy. By integrating Monte Carlo simulation tools, advanced biophysical models, and biological endpoint modeling with clinical patient cohorts, Dr. Mariani is driving patient-specific treatment strategies to maximize therapeutic benefit and minimize side effects. Thank you so much for joining us today. So the floor is yours. You are welcome to share your screen.
Can you see my screen? Yes, super. First of all, thanks for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to try to describe what we are doing here in Heidelberg. And thanks a lot also for the long introduction, very detailed. My topic will be a little bit different. You have heard until now about proton therapy. We have worldwide not only proton therapy, we have also heavier ions, mostly are carbon ions, and more recently also helium ions. So I'll let you introduce a little bit our facility. These are the layout in our facility. Is a synchrotron-based facility. It's called the Heidelberg Ion Beam Therapy Center. So there are two different ion sources here, a low energy LINAC. Then our synchrotron, the real, let's say, horsepower here that we have, two horizontal beam line and a very big, and that's going in the direction of what has been discussed also before, gantry for us is 670 tons, which are the patient you see in image here, here at the table, and here the gantry is rotating around. The patient will not realize that is such a big gantry around it. We are treating proton and carbon ions, roughly 7,000 patients from 2009, and more recently from 2021, helium ions. We have also the possibility to use heavier ions, more even than carbon ions, that is oxygen ions, and I show you an example why it could be useful to go even higher, heavier ions. So the rationale before was already briefly described. For us, when we move for proton and to carbon ions, so heavier ions, is very important to include also biological effect. So not only the physical effect, but also the biological description of the interaction with the radiation with the tissues, with the patient. And this is very important because when we deliver the dose, obviously we not only talk about physical dose, but also biological dose. So we want to describe an endpoint, a biological endpoint. So often is tumor control, so we want to kill the tumor, but also maximize the sparing of the healthy tissues. It's always the balance between these two. And maximize the tumor control and minimize the healthy tissue toxicity will be the goal of any photon and also proton heavy ion center. But you need to have tools. Normally, if you want to look at what are the options when you study medical physics or applied medical physics, and for me it was from a study at the beginning nuclear physics and then apply to the medical physics, is develop Monte Carlo tools. What are Monte Carlo? Monte Carlo is a way to describe interaction radiation with matter. Now, treatment planning system more and more have the Monte Carlo feature inside their treatment planning system. Why you do that? First, because you want to have the best description of the physical dose. You want actually to describe that to interface with the biological models, because remember, you want to also to have the biological description of the effect. And it's very important with time also to reduce, because remember, every time you treat a patient, you want to do the quality assurance. You want to be sure of what you are doing. More and more you are measuring it with a system. It can be reproduce the patient QA for a certain treatment planning system. You redo the measurements, but more and more you are trying to do is called in silico verification. Why you do in silico? Because you decrease the cost of your facility. You decrease the use of electricity. And more these results also in the running cost of your facility. And you want to reduce your your fingerprint in the to be a bit greener. I mean, this is very important right now in order to put also in action. So for us, we develop is called Monterey, is an open source Monte Carlo, which we aim for use for heavy ions, but also for light, like protons and those photon electrons. The idea to give a tool to other center in order to apply the dose distribution in the patient. Remember, is always physical dose, but also biological dose. In our case, we develop a framework we call Universe, where we try to integrate different aspects that could be important to describe, let's say, the biological effect in a patient. It can be the hypoxia, there is increase of hypoxia is becoming the tumor more radioresistant. You need higher dose for photon, for example. You have also biological background, like genetic background of the tumor of all the patients. You need to take in account in your treatment planning. You need also to consider different particles, proton, helium, carbon ions will have a different biological effect, but also different particle energy. So different LET, linear energy transfer, will correspond to different RB. And this you want to combine in a tool which is integrating your treatment planning, because you have to validate this in vitro, normally with the 2D, 3D, so cell lines, spheroid, organoids. Sometimes before you go preclinical, you need also in vivo validation. The idea is to translate all your steps between design of a new technique to the action. I give an example. We've been the first in Europe with raster scanning to introduce helium ion for treatment. So far, we are only one center in the world using helium ion. But we were not the first, because Berkeley in US, many, many years ago, already treated roughly 2,000 patients with this modality. Again, why? Well, it's like why protons are better than photons. Much better conformality, like you have seen before. And when you go from helium to proton, is even better the conformality, because there is a lower dose buff and better coverage of the healthy tissue. We wrote two important papers, one more on the roadmap with a lot of colleagues to see how we can put our efforts together in order to have a better treatment using helium ions compared to protons. And also we try to describe a little bit the step. But it's not easy. I mean, proton is already, you have seen before, difficult to implement in a state. But when you try to introduce a completely new modality, because you cannot consider the experience done in the early 80s of Berkeley, there are not possibility to translate the clinical outcome there. Imagine that until 86, Berkeley didn't use MRI for contouring the patients because there was not available. I mean, it's a very technological transfer. So we had to do everything from scratch. And it's a long journey. For us, for example, in 2014, we had to develop, update the accelerator. So you need to collaborate with people in your team which are able to upgrade the accelerator physicists. Then you can do dosimetry, okay, when you characterize your modality. But then you have to think which biological model I have to use in order to describe this biological effect. And then you have to do, first of all, measurements. Then you try to describe what the model available, or you have to invent your own biological model. And then if you want to apply in the clinic something, you have to have a tool. For Europe is CA labeled, in US is FDA approval. So we needed to pair up with a company. For us, it was a research laboratories, and we had to develop the first ever existing treatment planning for helium-ion. So we started there, and so this is completely novel. And you had to find a way in order to combine both the accuracy, but also the speed, because you need to have time required that allowed you to have this very accurate treatment, but in a very fast irradiation. And then we treated the first patient in 2021. Now we have treated more or less more than 100 patients with this new modality, and now we are collecting clinical data. Especially we see benefit for better conformality, especially in the pediatric cancer. So if you want to summarize a little bit what we are doing, and to make it simple and to describe what is the goal, is always here, the therapeutic window. Maximize the tumor control, so in reality will be to give 100% probability to kill the tumor, and normal tissues will be 0. Is not the case. Unfortunately, we have seen a photo will result in more toxicity because for the low dose envelope, proton less, then we believe helium and carbon ions also less. But well, it's not yet enough. Even with carbon ions, there are a lot of clinical experience from our colleague in Japan, for example. US, they will open in a few years also in the Mayo Clinic in Florida, in Jacksonville. But it's not enough because, again, there the therapeutic window is not just 1-0. There is a mixed region where you don't reach enough dose to kill the tumor, and you give if you are giving that dose to maximize tumor control, you give healthy tissue toxicity. So we always thought, and this is our goal, the main goal, is to implement a new technology. Helium ions, as I show, I will show you later oxygen ions. And also you say, okay, if I have more than one ions, proton, helium, carbon, oxygen, I could, based on the patient, on the location of the tumor in the patient, combine the ions in order to maximize the biological effect and minimize the healthy tissues. And this is called multi-ion concept that our colleagues also in Japan are using mostly for head and neck cancer. Then also, like the concept of VMAT, more or less, you could have mini beams. This obviously increase the low dose path, but you can have speed up the treatment and have higher LET, the conformality again, in the tumor. ILT means higher biological effect, higher capability to kill the tumor, again, to maximize. There are also two different, completely new way to treat. It's called flash radiotherapy. I don't know if you heard already, but so it's treating very fast, below 0.1 second, high dose per fraction. You can do this with proton, but you can do also with heavier ions, like we have shown it. And then there is mini beams. I don't know if also look at this, but is spatially fractionated. So, and this again is always to spare the healthy tissue, because then you can increase the dose to the tumor and again try to reach this dogma of 100% local control. That is the goal. Remember, when you are doing these studies, medical physics in this case, your study in radiation therapy can be application in other field. Imagine space and commercial flight application, because radiation protection is based on the same tool that you are developing study, like for medical physics. And also, it's not important only external radiotherapy, but also, for example, now alpha target therapy, it becomes more and more important. So externally, let's say internal radiotherapy. And again, this combination is based on the same tool. Those computation, biological effect, and this makes you understanding not only tumor specific, but also patient specific. Well, one example of what we did is called ion flash. So deliver the dose with ion beams very high, but in very fast. So instead that this is a typical radiation, this is our beam on, beam off of our synchrotron. This goes on for several minutes. We do the entire treatment. This is still a preclinical, it's not yet patient treated. We can deliver the entire dose in 100 milliseconds. You can imagine that the number of patient throughput will be much higher. You can somehow freeze the movement of the patient. So if you have a very good imaging pre-treatment or a gating system, you can irradiate in that framework or like a breath hold. Within that framework, 100 milliseconds, you can irradiate your patient. On the top of, let's say, physical characterization, you have also biological advantage because when you go very fast, the normal tissue can be spared. Here is the fibrosis between standard dose rate and ultra high dose rate, and you have a sparing of that. Fibrosis is one of readouts most complicated for lung treatment, like in this case. Again, it was not an easy journey to reaching this point because every new technique, and flash is even more complicated because you are pushing the delivery very fast, sometimes where the system, the delivery, the accelerator is not yet ready, and the dosimetry is not yet ready. So you have to do dosimetric validation, sorry. You have to understand, because it's not yet well known, which is the mechanistic reason why there is a sparing of the healthy tissue and preserving the tumor response. Without that, it's very difficult to do a clinical translation, to tell to our clinician which are the tumor which are maximize the biological effect. We had to do a lot of in vitro verification and in vivo validation, and we combine always both to experimental validation but also modeling, because at a certain point, as physicists, we need to quantify that effect. Dosimetry is easy, percentage variation and so on. Biological effect depends on the endpoint. But the results goes for us in the treatment planning system. We all base on that to validate our clinical translation. So we need this translation in the clinic through that. How we did that? Well, in order to release the dose very fast in a limited time, we develop a way, it's called using a mini-ridge filter, like a passive system that take one energy and spread in 3D to passive system. And this way, because if not, it will be too long, the time needed to deliver multiple energy. And with the scanning, we can give a 3D dose distribution like this one in 100 milliseconds. And again, you have to do dosimetry, verification in normal water, and then you have to start to understand, okay, how I can stress my system in order to find issues, because this is how we do medical field. We try to look for problems, and then because we don't want that happens in the clinic. So what you take, anthropomorphic phantom, you force the system to have errors. So like, because we are using 3D printer for these setups, so we understand, okay, how much is robust the system to uncertainties, to issues, because we want to give confidence, which is our goal, to the clinician to use that kind of modality. Remember, often you could be the first one, not in the world, but at least in your hospital, and when you introduce, for example, Proton for the first time, you will be the first to work with it. As a matter of literature, it's important as a reference, but it's your experience that will make the difference. How confident you are with this technique. It's always difficult at the beginning. So you need always different tool like Monte Carlo, other software to give you another answer, dosimetric data, measurement, everything that make you confident I can use. I can treat this patient because I know the limits of my system. Then another possibility that we are looking is called ion MBRT, so ion mini beams radiation therapy. And again, normally, as you know, as a physicist, we will like to deliver the dose like this. Nice broad beam on my target, and then in the entrance channel is homogeneous as well. But in reality, with the mini beams, you have a dose distribution like that. Peak and valley, peak and valley. So you have mean doses that are the same, because this is the way that you are treating, but the peak to valley dose is much different. You can have like 70 gray here, and here is practically zero. These are carbon ion mini beams. What we have seen, if we give the same mean dose to the healthy tissues, mini beams will spare. So what do we mean? If we can rescale, if we keep the same biological dose in the target, we can increase the healthy tissues dose, because with many beams, we can spare more. Again, what we can do, maximize tumor control and minimize the healthy tissues. This is always the goal. Another possibility that photon world, and this for me is also something to keep in mind. You spoke often, we speak often about superiority of heavy ions, proton, carbon ions, heavy particle, but we have to look in, and we have to be very keep in mind that photon world is also developing a lot and very fast. They're increasing conformality. If you imagine MRI guided photon therapy, MRI LINAC is expensive, but it is becoming often available, which means that you are increasing your conformality even with photon. Because remember, if you treat what you treat what you see and see what you treat. In this way, you can combine both of the two with MRI guided. And this you can do in photon in a much simpler way than charged particle like us, because if we have a magnetic field, our particles are deflected. And this, for example for us, we are developing this ion MRI business. There are no commercial products available. This is the complication of it. But as a physicist, you like that. You want a challenge, you try to assess it. So if you have two opposite beams here without magnetic field, then you turn on your magnetic field. The dose distribution immediately is wiped away because you have the deflection by magnetic field, and you need to compensate on the fly. And you see also the deviation, how poor dose distribution. But if you will be able to do MRI guided, you could, first of all, not to give a lot of CT to the patient, because so you decrease the dose you are giving to the patient. More, you can see during treatment a sort of tumor tracking where your tumor is. So imagine with the precision of proton, you can maximize with the break peak the dose there, and the healthy tissues is maximally preserved. But this is coming, this cost. So there is a, let's say, intermediate solution that is daily MRI guided. This we are in the clinic right now for liver patients, use carbon ions. So if we take planning CT and daily, we take a daily MRI, then we deform an MRI, actually we deform the CT on the MRI, so we have a sort of deformed CT. And then, thanks to that, we can do the replanning. We saw that we can very much spare our healthy tissues. In this case, with the tumor control of roughly 99.5%, due to the high carbon ions treatment, is 5 fraction, if you remember, above 10 gray per fraction, we can have the best, because you see what you are treating, you give highly higher biological dose, and you preserve healthy tissue. But again, you need to be adaptive. You need to adapt for the change in the patients. The next step is how we can maximize the tumor control, because even if carbon ions is used to treat radioresistant tumor, more radioresistance, is sometimes not even enough, because daily T, the linear reagent transfer, so the quantity that tell us I can kill hypoxic tumor, for example, is not high enough. So what you do in order to maximize, for example, this is a classic pancreatic cancer patient treated in our facility with 2 fields. Here, the red region here is daily T, linear reagent transfer. And you see it's not in the region that you want. This is our target here. Here is in the healthy tissue behind. So it's in the GI. We don't want that. We want that actually the LT is maximized in the center, because maximizes reduce the probability to have a recurrence in that regions. So we use different approaches, LT painting, arc radiotherapy. So also carbon ions is not good enough sometimes, so we have to change that. Another option that we are looking is including oxygen ions. Like we did with helium, we are slowly doing all the steps in order to do initial fundamental research, biological experiments, in silico study, and TPS commission. Every time is always the step It's just a different type of particle that you use. If you put together, you can do multi-ion, as I told you, and it has the advantage, this is an example of a sacral chordoma of one of our patients, that you can, depending on the patient, on location, size, increase the LT, hoping improving the tumor control, which is for large sacral chordoma our first most important problem right now. So in conclusion, so what we try to do with heavy ion therapy, but in general in our team, in general, is to try to have a sustainable, is very important, has to be limited cost, but also sustainability is very important to make it work, and safe, always translation of scientific innovation to the clinics, because we cannot accept the state of the art. We have to accept only we have 100% cure of our tumor patients. Obviously, the goal will be always for our facility, any other facility, the widening of therapeutic window, which results in higher cure rates and reduce of two important tasks. The first is the reduce the burden on the quality of life of our patients, which is the first and most important goal. But also on the healthcare system, because if we reduce the cost, we reduce the burden of healthcare system, more patients can be treated, and we have in general a better outcome. So thanks again for the invitation, open for any question.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the great talk. It was very interesting and novel for us. So we'll move on to the Q&A session of the seminar now. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to either raise your hand, turn on your camera and ask, or slide them in the chat and the moderators can read them out. So Dr. Mairani, we know it is late for you and we don't want to push too much of your time. So I'll direct the first question to you.
Yes.
Someone asked, are there different factors to take into account when running treatment plans for heavy ion therapy? So, for example, carbon and helium, or is the planning process largely similar to proton therapy?
I think in general, the planning approach is similar. For us, when you go helium and carbon ion, differently than proton, where it's been assumed an RB of 1.1, we have to describe the biological dose with a biological model. In Europe, we are using a certain biological model. In Japan, they use another biological model, where the input of that are the tissue sensitivity, the dose, and the linear energy transfer. I think it's still a space where we can improve things, obviously, and this is the biggest difference. So when you are looking and you do a quality assurance of your patient plan, you are doing a quality assurance of the physical dose, which is maybe imagine for a carbon ion 3 gray RB, the physical dose normally 1 gray, and you have 3 the factor of the RB. So when you verify this, you are verifying just one step of the entire process. Unfortunately, we don't verify for each patient the biological dose because that's the complexity of it. That will be depending of the tumor type, the tumor microenvironment. So that's why we are maximize the LT to decrease these type of uncertainties that obviously there are in the RB description.
Thank you so much for the answer. I think, Julian English has a question.
Yes. Thank you so much. I had a question for Dr. Tsang from Toronto regarding the comparative plan services for protons. You mentioned that, I forgot the numbers, but the referrals were about like 50, and the number of patients going for protons in the end were about 15, I think. Is there like a definitive reasons or a driving reason why people were not having proton in the end, or because of there was no dosimetric advantages, where it was more related to the costs of going or like the moving to another country? I wanted to know if there was a
Yeah, so
something.
great question. The cases that were clear for protons would just get referred without needing a comparative plan, right? So pediatric patients or 25-year-old with a localized low-grade brain tumor or something like that. The cases that were put through comparative planning were often because the family or the patient were really keen on it, but their tumor really wasn't that suitable. Sometimes like prostate cancer or someone with metastatic cancer, and we made the comparative plan just for to keep our staff trained and give we were asked to, right? But then the local oncologist sometimes used the comparative plan and said, oh, there's not that much difference in the plan, you should just have x-rays, and usually those cases are not so suitable for protons anyways. So I wouldn't, it wasn't, the dosimetry was always better with protons, but in a patient with a metastatic renal cell carcinoma and their survival's a few years anyways, it probably isn't worth the cost to send them for protons, given the barriers, and those were the type of cases that we got. So that's the mainly why. And then there were a small number of patients whose tumors were growing very quickly and they needed to get started with X-ray. So because of the delays with applying for out of province, they didn't end up going. It's more there were just a lot of logistical barriers. The dosimetry was always better.
Thank you.
There is a question sent to all speakers. Can you comment on the RB uncertainty and how is it handled during planning? Maybe I'll ask Dr. Yan to answer first, if that's good.
Yeah, I think so there are definitely the uncertainties in RBE, but to my knowledge, I think in the current commercial treatment planning system, there's just a fixed value of 1.1. But I think we take maybe part of it into the range uncertainty and setup uncertainty in robust optimization, or we do robust analysis afterwards. That could be taking into account part of it. There's also, experience of treatment planners. I think like the dosimetrist, for example, you would not put the distal end of your beam directly to the sensitive healthy tissue or healthy organs to avoid the uncertainty. But definitely there's ongoing research actively looking into how to maybe integrate that more directly into treatment planning, and LET optimization or evaluation could definitely be helpful as well. That's my thoughts.
I can also comment on that. I mean, I completely agree with you. And exactly this is in the current treatment planning, you can consider LT optimization for proton as well. So you can rearrange the proton LT somehow indirectly consider these uncertainties compared to RB 1.1. And you rearrange like this. Yes, in the range uncertainties is actually 1% of it was due to physics, but the remaining percentage is also due to biological reasons. And recently, what the people are looking more and more is to try to correlate the LT variation with, for example, brain necrosis or other readouts where you can see RB effect. For heavy ions, instead, is a must. So we have to consider variation of RB, as I mentioned before. And I saw another quick question there. No, for ions, for protons, also at Heidelberg, we still use an RB of 1.1. There is a reason, very clear. There are many, probably like 30 RB models around the world for protons. And if every center will use their proton RB, we will not able to talk to each other in terms of exchange the protocols or using, let's say, similar comparison, which is a problem, for example, for carbon ions. As in Europe and in Japan, we use a different biological model, and we need to implement a sort of translation or let's say conversion factor between the two biological model, which for people not expert can be resulting very complicated to explain why RB weighted dose in Japan, in Germany, even are the same number, actually means something else. We didn't want to have this, let's say, complexity also for proton, and I think we stick the guidelines will be to stick with RB 1.1 more or less forever. This is my feeling with experience, but to report LET distribution, to report more, let's say, LET spectra maybe, but to make it a little bit more general so people can compare different centers. Because we have seen, like from your presentation, we are 116 center, if I remember correctly, with protons. And I could imagine if 10 use an RB of 1.1, 20, 1.25, 3, a variable RB will make it very difficult to exchange information.
Okay, thank you so much for your answer, Dr. Mariani and Dr. Susu. I don't know if Dr. Darin want to add something about that, or well, I can ask the next question. So, okay. So for Dr. Mariani, it says like, are there different factors to take into account running treatment plans for heavy ion therapy, or is the planning process largely similar to proton therapy? Oh no, wait, we already answered this question. Yes, sorry. Okay, so in the context of SVRT, is it ideal to have the valid dose be as close to zero as possible?
Great question. I think so. SVRT, spatially fractionated radiation therapy, for the people not familiar with that. So practically is the, let's say, what I described in beams before. I don't know. Also there is not yet known very much which is the mechanism behind. There is a different explanation. Somebody say immunoresponse. Somebody says that is actually a volume effect. So in principle, my current interpretation, especially if I look at some skin toxicity data, will be yes, if I'm able to minimize the valley, so to zero, and minimize and maximize the peak, this will be beneficial, because then the healthy, let's say, normal tissue around could help the region where it's getting toxicity to heal. If this goes in the region of immunoresponse or a region of, let's say, local repair. But sometimes somebody say, yes, well, no, it's actually the height of the peak the most important. But, it's still discussable. Personally, I believe that is very important to keep the value as low as possible. But I mean, as any theory, we have to prove with experimental data and check in a different court, because these are normally a in vivo effect. So we need to read out, and that's why we use carbon ions. Sorry, because compared to proton, where the peak to valley is smaller, because proton will still scatter some, carbon ions scattering is much more reduced, and this increases the peak to plateau valley.
Thank you for the great answer. I actually want to also ask a question, if that's okay, to Dr. Yan. So I don't know much about upright radiotherapy, but I've read papers where the air gap, so the distance between the nozzle to the patient, influences the spot sizes and therefore treatment plan. So I was wondering if there's any like potential effect upright could have on the air gap, whether it reduces or if there are like accommodations we have to make to the chair, etc.
Great question. Yeah, so for the current commercial chair system, I think it's probably maintaining a bit similar air gap. As we have the gantry, I don't have the specific number on top of my head, but that is definitely, I think, one consideration when we doing upright development, we would need to consider. And I would think that one of the advantage of moving, say, towards a horizontal fixed beam line without gantry could be we without the moving structure of the gantry, we might be able to get a smaller spot size. That could be helpful in terms of planning wise. Of course, there are different parameters taking into account. Also field size, as you said, the air gap, and the the setup uncertainty, I feel like that's one area we could have we would like to work more on is to understand also how when patients set it up in upright, do we have the same setup uncertainty as we have in supine, or how do we take that into account? Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of work to do.
But that's yeah, I hadn't thought of the setup uncertainty stuff with upright. That's really cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we have another question for Dr. Tsang. It says, how much of the delays in establishing particle therapy in Canada are due to insufficient advocacy awareness versus insufficient scientific evidence of particle superiority over photons? For example, comparative trials of photons versus protons across a wide range of clinical indications.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the delays are mostly surrounding awareness and less about the evidence. We know that there's ongoing trials in adult cancers. In kids, though, the community is pretty universally in consensus that it's a good idea to do protons. And so most of the advocacy has been like, look at this poor child that's like 7 years old and just had a brain surgery, now needs to go 6 weeks in a different country for their protons, and that's terrible. And we were pushing that, and that's sort of accepted by decision makers as a valid reason to have protons. The delays are more just in the capital cost of the building, and the government has agreed to fund uh, uh, sending kids individually because the incremental cost of each kid is not that high, right? Up to 100,000 or 200,000 US dollars. But the capital cost of building a new building has been quite a lot, so there's a bit of sticker shock. It's similar with, in a sense, with drugs, right? Drugs you approve, and each patient costs a little bit, but then the cumulative budget is a lot, and that kind of is less painful if you paid over a bit. But with protons, you have to pony up however many hundreds of millions of dollars right away, and that's a bit of a barrier to get over. So that's the challenge in big capital projects.
Amazing, thank you. And I think we have one last question in the chat here for Dr. Yan. Ranan asked, in the perfect low-cost particle therapy clinic, for example, no gantry, fixed beam, upright chair, etc., could you give a ballpark of the cost per patient or cost per treatment compared to current standard particle therapy setups?
Great question, and I think it's a little complex to answer the cost question. It's countries are different on setting up how much they charge for treatment, and also there's insurance company involvement consideration. How much they reimburse, whether self-pay versus insurance are the same. But our goal, I would say our vision or goal is to first reduce the capital cost of purchasing the system. And we are hoping that we could, say, reduce the compact proton system cost to on a maybe slightly more than the advanced photon treatment, like if you would buy a true beam from Varian, and you maybe pay slightly more to get a single room fixed beam proton system. And we're hoping if we could do this, then there might be rooms to either discuss with hospital or go with insurance company or regulatory organization. For example, in the US, I'm not sure for other countries or Canada how treatment prices are determined. But I think with the first step to reduce the capital cost, that would be hoping that hospitals spend less to invest in, then that could in return to reduce the treatment cost. And also, I think the maintenance cost, and by also leveraging, say, AI or so to have more efficient treatment process, that could also all reduce the maintenance cost of Proton system. And that's hopefully also helpful to reduce treatment cost.
Okay, so that was our last question. So thank you so much for joining our second C3 session. So we thank all the speakers, Dr. Susu Yan, Dr. Tsang, and Dr. Andrea Mairani. And also we thank Elena for being my co-moderator in this session. And so you are invited to review our session that is recorded and will be submitted in YouTube soon. And also, if you want to keep receiving any information from future talks, please scan the QR code and you can go to a link tree of the student council.
Just want to thank all the speakers again. We know
Yes.
You're very busy in the clinic, and we really appreciate the time you've taken here. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Bye bye.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Bye-bye.
accepting the invitation. Yes.